And for more on all of this, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, and Ben Rhodes, the former deputy national security advisor to President Obama. Ambassador Oren, first of all, let me drill down on that, the frustration that Israel is feeling, according to all my reporting in Rafah's as well, about the withholding of those weapons right now because of concern, frankly, about the impact in Rafah and the possibility of civilian deaths there, dissatisfaction by the U.S. with the plan for sheltering all of those people before operation started.
Good to be with you, Andrea. As always, certainly there's frustration. It's not without precedent. President Obama withheld certain forms of ammunition during the 2015 battles with Hamas, again, under the claim that there were too many civilians being killed. But this is a much wider, much more an all-encompassing delay in the shipment of essential munitions. And the frustration stems, first of all, for the, it's not quite a precedent, but the return of the Obama precedent on a much grander scale, and the message it sends to our enemies in the region about America's willingness, ability to stand foursquare with Israel against those enemies. I think it's a message to Americans throughout the world, and not a particularly helpful message. But beyond that, the Army is actually trying to meet President Biden halfway. The president has made it clear that while it does oppose sort of a wholesale incursion of the IDF into Rafah, it would not necessarily oppose surgical strikes. And so far, the Israeli maneuvers in Rafah more closely resemble a surgical strike than they do an all-out incursion. And it's really just around the border areas of the Philadelphia route. That's the border between Egypt and Gaza, and along the coastal area, with an attempt to move, a very serious attempt to move civilians away from the combat zones. Moreover, the question of Keren Shalom. You mentioned that this crossing earlier in your report, that Israel had reopened the crossing at the request of President Biden. That was a very tough decision. We had 4 soldiers killed earlier this week by a Hamas shelling. The shells were fired from within Rafah. And so that was very reminiscent of October, the horrors of October 7th, of Israelis being killed within Israel by Hamas artillery. And so to reopen it was not easy. And the fact that aid has not gone through that crossing so far is probably due to the fact that drivers simply won't drive through it because the area is still under Hamas shelling. It was on as late as yesterday evening. I'm not sure I would drive a truck through that crossing as well. Tremendous disappointment and, I guess, head-scratching. How does the Biden administration expect Israel to release the hostages, those who are alive, without maintaining significant military pressure on Hamas? Clearly, Hamas has rejected the very generous offer, as described by Secretary of State Blinken, that Israel made for hostage relief, a very generous offer and a very controversial offer within Israel. But barring any Hamas willingness to negotiate hostage release, a serious effort, Israel has no choice but to maintain military pressure on Hamas. So hopefully it will release hostages, as it did twice in November.
Well, let me just follow up and then bring in Ben Rhodes, because hostage families, and I have been talking to them, and I was there last week when they were talking to Secretary Blinken outside the hotel. They want the hostages to be the top priority, not getting the last battalions in Rafah. And you have the CIA director in Israel today talking to the prime minister. And we're told that these talks are very close, that what's emerged in the last couple of days is a narrowing of differences. Is there a point of view of put the hostages first, agree to it, then worry about going back into Rafah or whatever else has to be renegotiated, ironed out in the days, weeks to come after those people are alive and home?
Well, Andrea, I'm not a spokesman for the government. I'm speaking as a citizen. I think my position reflects those of the majority of Israelis. And yes, we're putting the hostages first at this stage. And Israel's willing to go not the extra mile, the extra 10 miles to get those hostages back. Israel had agreed to, in return for the release of 33 hostages, going down from 40, because we understood that there were no 40 hostages that were alive that met the criteria of being either aged or infirm or women. There weren't that many that were left alive in Hamas captivity, going down to 33, willing to agree to a 40-day ceasefire with the possibility of renewing that ceasefire should further hostages be released, and then also releasing from our prisons a great number of convicted Palestinian terrorists, many of them with blood on their hands, which is terribly traumatic for the Israeli families, the victims of those terrorists. You have to explain to them why their loved ones aren't going home, but these terrorists are going to go home to a hero's welcome is not easy by any means. Hamas comes back with an agreement that says basically Israel has to say it lost the war, withdraw entirely from Gaza, and in which case all the soldiers have given their lives, the thousands wounded have all done so in vain. And in return from this, get this, you get a handful of terrorists, and Hamas can emerge from the tunnels, a handful of hostages, and Hamas can emerge from the tunnels, reclaim control over all of Gaza, rearm, regroup, and mount the next assault against Israel, which Hamas leaders say quite openly 10,000 times until Israel. And then the final sort of cherry on the top of all this, we're talking about nearly 1,000 very dangerous criminals released from Israeli jails, leaders of terrorist groups who will be released to the West Bank, and you could probably at that point kiss the Palestinian Authority goodbye. So I can't see where these two positions are getting closer, Andrea. I hope you're right. I don't see it.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Ben Rhodes, jump in here. Your reaction to the U.S. halting the shipment of the weapons, including 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs.
Well, I don't think it should come as a surprise. I mean, I think for the last several months, President Biden and the Biden administration have made clear their concerns and, if not outright opposition, to a kind of large-scale Israeli military operation in Rafah, given the fact that you have well over 1 million Palestinians there, many of whom are civilians. Yes, there's some Hamas, but there's an enormous amount, over 600,000 children, given the near famine-like conditions that are already prevailing. And the reality that if you have a significant military operation that includes an aerial bombardment, that includes ground incursions, that you would have an enormous loss of civilian life. And this has been building for some time, because I think what the administration has been looking for is a different plan. And they've sent a variety of different officials to Israel to consult about what are the precautions being taken to protect civilians, what are the precautions being taken to ensure that aid can continue to get in. And while I'm not privy to those conversations like Ambassador Oren, I'm no longer a government official, it's pretty clear that those consultations have not satisfied the concerns of the administration. So this is not coming out of nowhere at all. Andrea, I think we've all known that the potential for a Rafah military operation was a potential breaking point in terms of the provision of certain types of military assistance. The administration has been very transparent about that. But I think this is them sending a message that if Rafah goes forward in the way that clearly it has probably been briefed to American officials, that the Biden administration is not comfortable providing the kind of weapons, particularly 2,000-pound bombs, which are by definition an indiscriminate weapon, they're not comfortable going forward with those deliveries. Now, I think everybody's preferred option is for there to be some kind of deal around a hostage release and a ceasefire for 40 days and to see if you can build upon that for additional releases and additional diplomacy. So there's kind of a race against the clock here. Can that deal get done? Does the Rafah operation go forward in a way that would, I think, probably foreclose that deal happening? Does Hamas pull out of those talks? Of course, they are a part of these negotiations as well. But I think where I also agree with Ambassador Oren is it does feel, we all can hope for that, and it's still possible. But I think it's going to be quite difficult to get that done.
Well, we're going to leave it there because we're going to hear shortly from a very prominent American hostage family about their son, Hirsch Poland Goldberg. So let me leave it there. The two of you have set up the debate that we are hearing, and I'm sure is happening within two governments right now. Former Ambassador Michael Oren, former Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes. Thanks to both of you.